Hi guys, just before we start the episode today, whatever platform you are listening to this on, whether it be on the podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, whatever it is, please support it. Please like, subscribe, whatever you can do. We want to reach as many people as possible. So please do that and we'll get right into the episode. Welcome to another episode of the Chronic Comeback Podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have on the show Sarah Jackson Panther. Awesome name, which we already discussed before the episode. Love it. And just to give you a bit of detail on Sarah's story before we get into it. So there's a lot of similarities, and we were talking about it before the episode, and I can't wait to get into the detail of it. But in 2011, Sarah was exposed to mold and contracted a viral co-infection caused by EPV. Over the next few years, this morphed into a number of disorders and syndromes, and actually spent the better part of 6 years in bed searching for diagnoses and exhausting treatment options. And then in 2016, things started to change around. She began to find answers by studying the effects of trauma on the body and the brain, and discovered an undeniable link between illness and physical and emotional trauma, something which has taken me years to even believe is true, and now I know is going to be a big part for myself. So fast forward to the summer of 2016, she began rehabilitating her limbic system with DNRS, something we've discussed on the show before. And she was able to use that and a number of other tools to help recover her health and be in the position she's in today. And so she's a constant source of positivity online on Instagram. And if you're not following her, please do. And thanks so much for coming on the show and agreeing to tell your story. I'm really excited to get onto it. How are you?
I'm well, Phil. Thanks for having me. It's amazing we can connect from around the world here like this.
Yes, definitely. Just as it's starting to get, it's like just like 6 p.m. now, and it's starting to get dark here in the UK. So it's I can see the winter months are ahead of us here. It's not fun. Cool. Yeah. Let's get into it. If we could go back before 2011, and what was your life and health like before that point? Were you someone who had issues at all, or were you someone, and it just kind of hit you out the blue, or were you, what was your life like and health before that?
I was so blessed to grow up in a home where there was no childhood trauma. My childhood was magical, climbing trees, and I was homeschooled, 2 really loving parents. And so I was very, very emotionally and mentally protected as a child, physically protected as a child. And so I grew into young adulthood. I was very, very healthy. I was an athlete. I was recruited to run track at a university. I was a hurdler, and I was an All-American hurdler. And I, blazed my way through undergrad and graduate school. I was an achiever, so I always had a lot on my plate, a big appetite for life, and I always had the capacity to engage in the way that I wanted to engage. Polyvagal theory looks at the primary states of the nervous system, and they call that baseline of regulation ventral vagal presence. Every nervous system should go back to that baseline of regulation of ventral vagal presence after stressors have passed. And for me, that was my baseline. I was regulated, my nervous system was healthy, and so my body was healthy. And it was a progressive spiral into the pit for me. And it did take many years for me to even realize that I was sliding into the pit, because I was so focused on moving forward and achieving and growing. And so I think in retrospect, I can see the first piece of the puzzle was my training at such an elite level. It was very, very hard on my body. I didn't know at the time some of the mitochondrial genetic mutations that I had that made it harder for my body to recover. And it was a program that was designed for the male body, not the unique, specifically hormonal needs of the female body. And it just beat me up. And so I ended up having to get on birth control because my hormones were so wonky from the training. And I didn't know at the time that birth control can be a precursor to autoimmunity. It can really impact gut health, and, it can cause that domino effect in the body. And so that was my first real taste of fatigue that I believe was caused by severe depression. And when I got off of that, it did take about 8 months to get back to what felt like a healthy baseline. Then, unbeknownst to me, I'm still training and, driving, pushing, striving, wearing out my little adrenal glands. I was living in an apartment that was just crawling with mold. And we did eventually discover the mold. The ceiling ballooned, right? And there was like orange liquid seeping out of it, and moved to another apartment downstairs, my roommates and I. So still in that building, because of course not aware of how mold could, and I grew up in a wet, rainy state, the state of Washington. I went to school in California and hadn't really had issues with mold. But I think, I know now that I have some genetic challenges that impact my body's ability to detox mold. I don't think those were really an issue when I lived in Washington, because there weren't these stressors that were changing my genetic expression. And so I think it was the combination of the exposure to all of that mold and all the other stress. And by my senior year of running track, I was actually in grad school at that point, but running track still, I started to get sick every couple of weeks, and I wasn't fast anymore. And so something was clearly wrong, but I'd been so healthy. I think I was in a bit of denial. Not that I was choosing denial, but it just didn't cross my mind that this could be a problem, that this just was a season that I was passing through and my body was adjusting to the stress. And then I'm 37 now, and I was 25. I was in an abusive relationship, and at the same time got Epstein Barr. At some point also got Cytomegalovirus. Not sure if that happened concurrently with Epstein Barr or was later. And I think the soil was fertile when those viruses appeared in my body, and the abuse, I think, absolutely ransacked my immune and nervous systems. There's a fair bit of research now on the impact of abuse on health in the long term. And that was the point at which I got very, very sick. But it still did take about a year in bed before I went, oh, this isn't going anywhere. I'm not just going to hurdle over this like I have everything else in my life.
That's it. That resonates so much with me. That first, you just think it's going to pass, right? And then you're like, it's been a few months now. This is
right.
This should be gone. And I think it's just because your whole life you're like used to things passing, right? And when it finally doesn't, when it continues to not pass, the mental impact that has on you, it feels like you're just being pummeled on a daily basis. How were you dealing with that, like mentally, like when you got to that year point and you realized this isn't going? What was going on for you mentally then?
Well, there was a lot of grief. You lose a lot when you're in bed. You lose a lot of your community, and even the people that hang around, you lose the capacity to interact with them with regularity. So you're isolated, you lose your autonomy, your freedom to be able to get up and do the things you want to do. You lose financial stability if you had it to begin with, because of the bills, the medical bills particularly. It's so hard to work. And you lose your sense of self, right? And everything else is stripped away, and you're just a naked soul in bed. And so alongside the grief, there was a lot of shame. Yeah. And it's so interesting, because if you had asked me before I got sick what my identity rested on, I would have told you my identity is that I'm a child of God. But then when everything is stripped away, you go, oh, wait a minute. I was actually propping my value up on a whole lot of things that I wasn't aware of. Yeah. I really relied on my ability to garner attention as an athlete to feel good. I had no idea. As a student, the achievements in school and in work, without those, I felt I felt like my value had been stripped away, and I had little to nothing to offer other people and little to nothing to offer God. And so those felt engulfing, right? The grief, the shame, the depression that comes when you've lost so much, but also there's a ton of inflammation throughout your body. And, before I ever started to find answers for the physical part of my healing, I began to see as I laid there in bed that the sickness was an invitation to learn that my worth was rooted truly in my identity as a child of God, that it wasn't contingent on anything else. And I knew that in my head, but my body and my heart, my emotional core had to learn that. And it was an invitation to let myself be a whole human that didn't just focus on that relentless positivity, but validated the very real losses and process them and let myself engage the journey of grief. And so there was a good long season of exploring that deepest layer of spiritual healing while sort of in futility searching for physical answers, right? Those came later. The spiritual healing started to come first.
Yeah, well, I feel like you got to that realization far sooner than I did. And I was just knocking on the physical door for a very, very long time. But so at that point, did you get a diagnosis? Because I know that when someone's that sick, they're like, I need a diagnosis. I need something to cling on to. Like, where are you at in that journey, part of the journey?
It took years before there was any sort of concrete diagnosis. So I first went to sort of traditional Western medical doctors, and they weren't able to help in any way. And there really wasn't any apparent desire to dig in and try to problem solve that I could see on their part, right? It was sort of a perfunctory, your cursory blood work, your introductory blood work seems fine. So then sort of shoo you out the door and move you on your way, right? It's that medical gaslighting that is so pervasive. This must be depression. This must be anxiety. Here, let me give you some pills. This is all in your head. And so I did eventually, there was a chiropractor up the street who practiced applied kinesiology to help identify how the systems, organs, glands of the body were functioning and to try to match the correct supplements to the body's needs. And I didn't see any progress with that. I did eventually, it's so funny how God leads us on this journey toward answers. Are you familiar with the Pioneer Woman?
No.
Okay, so she's an American blogger that really, I think, has taken off internationally. She's got millions and millions of readers, and she blogs about her life on a ranch in Oklahoma. And I was reading her blog, and she was talking about her daughter who had just a general malaise and got her tonsils out. And I thought, well, for Pete's sake, my tonsils have been swollen and filled with pus for 3 years. So maybe that could help. Like maybe removing that bit of infection could help my immune system.
Yeah.
And that was a few years in. That was the first point at which I started to feel improvement.
Okay.
And it was short-lived because I still hadn't healed my nervous system. And then there were other perfect storms later that pushed me further into the pit. But it was very self-guided. I think a lot of us experience that, right? We're having to put the pieces together because doctors aren't willing or able. And so that was probably the first 4 years for me.
Do you know what kind of, I don't know if you got the same feeling that from what I'm getting from your story is you got, so stuff like you mentioned, like Epstein Barr virus, like mold. I don't know how do you pronounce the other one?
Cytomegalovirus, CMV.
I have heard of that before, but
yeah,
these are things that most people are exposed to or maybe even have, and therefore because when I was told that I had a lot of problems with viruses and that was probably causing my issues, so I would tell people this and I'd say this is why I'm feeling like I'm feeling, and they would just look at me with a raised eyebrow and just be like, well, that's what everyone has, like you know, this shouldn't be causing you all of the problems you had. And it caused like a gap you know, a barrier between myself and like my friends and family, because there wasn't that label on it. Did you find that, like, could people understand it, and did it really like affect your relationships?
It really affected relationships. It's hard for people to believe in things they can't see and they have no category for. And actually, that's not true. I think people often believe in things they can't see. And maybe that's part of the pain, is it feels like there's picking and choosing, right? But when it comes to health, it's hard for them to believe in things they can't see. And so there was a fair bit, I think, of unintentional gaslighting from other people, right? I had one gal at a birthday party. Everybody was praying for me. It was sort of like a birthday blessing circle, and they were all coming and sitting in front of me and speaking words of blessing over me. And it was wonderful that I was able to be up in this circle and participating, that my body was letting me. And she came and sat in front of me and she said, "Sarah, you are sick because you like the attention, because you want to be sick, and you're going to stay sick if this doesn't change." And so someone I didn't know well, right? I'll feel your face.
That's one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. That's horrible.
It was horrifying. My heart dropped into my stomach and felt frozen. But that was unfortunately, it was not uncommon to have people say things like that, right? You're not positive enough. You're not forward thinking enough, right? If I ever gave voice to the grief, to the reality of my situation, I was accused of sort of keeping myself mired in that place because I was acknowledging with people I thought were safe how painful it was. And so that was very, very hard. And, I think, as most people experience, I looked good. And that was part of it. So when you don't have, I think some of the challenge is just language, right? Like if I just came up with some sort of word, it's a furnkle. It's a furnkle. And you're going to go, well, furnkle doesn't mean anything to me. Like, furnkle is not impactful. And so culturally, we have this shared meaning that we attach to things like cancer and AIDS. But when you have something like chronic fatigue, which first of all is an incredibly misleading label, or Lyme, which Lyme showed up as equivocal on my testing, but I was textbook for Lyme. So there was a clinical, sort of assessment toward Lyme. But if we can't, where was I going? I totally lost my train of thought here.
I think you were talking about the person who said that awful comment and how it's like the misunderstanding. Yeah.
Thank you. Can you tell I'm tired, Phil? So you have Lyme, you have mold, you have parasites. And for a lot of people, it just feels like they're hearing this is a furnkle, right? Like it's not imbued with meaning for them the way things like cancer and AIDS are. It's not part of the cultural collective conversation about health. And maybe with COVID long haulers now, it will become more part of the collective conversation. So it means something to people, right? People have a point of reference for it. But yeah, there was a lot of doubt. I felt very, very alone, a lot of frustration. I had excessive limitation, right? Like, please don't light that candle around me, because of the neurological symptoms it would trigger, or that smell is like, I need to run out of the house. And so it felt aggravating to people to have to ask for those sorts of accommodations. Yeah.
I think it's people, the things with chronic illness, I think it, and then they don't mean to be, but it's almost like the things with like cancer and things that are, I guess in the medical sense of it, like there's a process, right? You go, you get your treatment and it works, or it doesn't, and you move through it. And because chronic, it goes on and on, it's people get a little bit like they want it, they get a bit tired of it, and they get and they're just like, is this still going on with you? And it's like, they're not trying to be unhelpful. It's just, I guess this is the way people are. And I would like to think that I wouldn't have been like that, but I probably would have been. Now, obviously, no chance. If I ever hear of anyone I know who has anything remotely like what I've got, I'm so understanding. Jumping back into your story, because I keep hijacking it with questions.
Yeah, no, this is
very interesting. So I think you said you were about 4 years into this, and And could you start to take us through that part of the story?
Yeah. So I was about 4 years in, and I had another perfect storm, some more mold exposure, some other emotional trauma. And I woke up one morning, it was the morning actually after a massage, which I think was sort of the impetus to releasing a whole bunch of gunk that circulated my system. My system couldn't detox it and it just went bonkers. And it was horrific, the neurological symptoms, totally incapacitating and devastating and disorienting because I had gotten my tonsils out and had made progress. It's interesting. I can look back at blogs and things, and there were times I was like, I felt normal today. And I look back and I go, oh, Sarah, you were at 20% that day, but 20% felt incredible because you forgot what it felt like to be healthy. And so I had seen improvement. I was grateful for the improvement. I still spent most days in bed resting. And so it was devastating and disorienting to be knocked off of that healing trajectory. And so then I became even more aggressive in seeking answers. You know, finances were so tight. It's hard to discern, do I take out a loan? Right? Those first 4 years, do I take out a loan to pay for things? But what's the stressor of that going to be like? But I think there just came a point at the 4-year mark, I was like, I will do whatever it takes. This is unbearable. And it had been unbearable, but I think by year 4, you're just like, no, actually, I can't handle much more of this. And a couple of years passed, going to some medical doctors that were more holistic and naturopathic doctors and acupuncturists. You know, there's the laundry list of all the different practitioners that we're consulting with. And finally started to be able to put some labels to things, right? So identifying the viruses, identifying mold, mycotoxins in my blood, identifying parasites, passing parasites through a detox protocol. And that was helpful. And then I felt like, okay, I can at least orient myself in what's happening right now, that all this stuff is happening in my body. But the approach from all of these doctors was still, let's do the treatments, the IVs and the supplements and the detoxing and the saunas. And there were seasons of several weeks where I might have relief. And it wasn't healing, but it was enough relief that I felt hopeful. But then I moved back to that baseline of just sort of horror. And it wasn't until then 6 years in that are you familiar with the children's book character Chicken Little?
Yeah, I think so, but not very. Obviously, as you can tell, not very familiar. But please give maybe.
Let me elaborate.
Yeah.
Chicken Little is this chicken who feels in every moment like the sky is falling. She is convinced the sky is falling, and it is incumbent upon her to tell all of her people, the cows and the ducks and the goats, that the sky is falling, run for cover, the sky is falling. And there was a point about 6 years in where I went, wow, my approach to this process is Chicken Little. I feel like the sky is falling. And in a lot of ways, the sky felt like it had already fallen. And I was trying to figure out what are the pillars I can use to push the sky back up or to keep the sky from falling down any further. And so as I was pursuing these doctors and treatments, it was from this panicked state. And now I understand that so often when we're stuck in a survival mode, the thoughts and feelings we have, the stories we tell ourselves, don't come from the soulish part of us. They come from our body. So when the body is in a sympathetic state of fight or flight, it's going to generate thoughts and feelings that move you toward action, right? Your body is generating energy in that state to help you to run and fight. And so the thoughts and feelings that come out of that state often feel like, I have to do something about this now or else. So I can look back now with compassion and see, oh, Sarah, you were believing the story your sympathetic nervous system was telling you, feeling like you had to rush and execute perfectly. And it's very all or nothing, right? The limbic system really has two categories that it operates out of. Either it's safe or it's not. Either or, black or white. And so that either or, black or white, all or nothing paradigm can become sort of pervasive when we're stuck in a survival state. So I recognized, wow, as I am running around like Chicken Little, trying to hold the sky up, I'm actually stressing myself out even more, right? So when the body's in that sympathetic state of fight or flight, it generates those thoughts and feelings. We got to do something about it now. And then when we indulge that, we validate the limbic system's sense that there's imminent threat. So I was continuing to validate the limbic system's sense. There's imminent threat. There's imminent threat. There's imminent threat. Let me rush. Let me rush. Let me work harder. Okay, this is not working for me. And really what brought this to my attention was I was reading some Jewish poetry that I love in the book of Psalms, Psalm 23. You may have heard it, Phil. It's a popular poem. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And there's a verse where the poet says, goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I went, whoa, I am chasing them. And if I really do believe I'm a child of God and that I'm not in this alone, right? There was that deep soulful healing that I started to experience. We're not in this alone. We are loved. There's a God who cares about our bodies more than we do. And so what would it look like for me to try an experiment where I let goodness and mercy follow me? And I operate from a place of discernment and wisdom instead of frantic Chicken Little striving. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do it. But Phil, it felt vulnerable. I really wanted to rush. My body was telling me to rush. My brain was telling me to rush. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just keep this one doctor's appointment, because I really did feel this conviction, like you just need to clear your schedule and give yourself some time to discern so you can do the next right thing in love for yourself rather than out of frantic panic. And I thought, well, I'll just keep this one doctor. There was this new doctor in San Diego. My friend was going to drive me down there. It was all worked out. But there was this little niggling voice that said, no, but Sarah, I really think God is calling you to this experiment. But I thought, well, we'll see. And the night before that appointment, my friend called and said, listen, we all have the stomach bug. I can't take you. And I went, okay, God, let me really clear my schedule. Just give myself a beat. Right. And so I think so often in trauma circles, when we talk about mindset, we do emphasize the striving and the overcoming. And there is a real place for rest and for identifying the stories our nervous systems are telling us and saying, thank you, nervous system. I see you're trying to protect me, but we're going to do this differently from a place of wisdom, discernment, and compassion. And that was really what changed things for me. And about a month into my experiment, I'd already had a whole bunch of tests where doctors were like, there's something wrong with your amygdala, your hippocampus, like all the different parts of my limbic system. These tests are showing your limbic system is not in a good place. But they didn't have any recourse for me. And so I was talking to my friend who's a therapist, and she is about 15 years ahead of me on this journey for her healing from Lyme and Epstein Barr and all of that. And she just said, Sarah, listen, I think you need to rehabilitate your amygdala. I thought, well, yeah, that's what doctors have been saying. Well, they didn't say it like that. They just said there's something wrong. But when she said it that way, you need to rehabilitate it, I thought, wait a minute, that's a thing? Oh, hang on, Lily's about to bark, the mail. Okay. I have a little 15-pound guard dog that fiercely protects me from the mailman who just came. And so I went online and I Googled how to rehabilitate your amygdala. That was the first sort of glimmer of light that maybe there was something I could do about this. And a number of limbic system retraining programs popped up, GUPTA and DNRS, and I researched them both and felt really drawn to DNRS. And so a few weeks later, I started the program and I started to heal for the first time really in 6 years. Although I had seen some progress off and on throughout those years, it felt very superficial, right? This felt like a deeper, truer physical healing. And it was a journey. And I'm still on that healing journey. There are still some things that I'm training with, to use that limbic system vocabulary. That was 5 years ago. So that was sort of the starting point of my healing.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah. It's what was it like when you first started like feeling that like initial healing, you must have had an emotional release, just even that, like you must have, I'm sure there were tears shed. Like, what was that like?
I expected it would be that way, Phil, but it wasn't.
Right.
I expected that healing would feel rather like whooshing down a water slide. It was much more akin to hiking through Sawtooth Mountains.
Okay.
Right. It's circuitous, it's up and down. The up and down can feel like back and forth, which can be very discouraging. And initially, signs of healing are very different than we expect. So there was one that I did realize was a sign of healing was actually the first day I started training. It's the end of the brain boot camp that you do initially with DNRS. And I started to get a sore throat and congestion and feel feverish by the end of that first day of training. And I went, hallelujah, my immune system's coming online. Like this, it's responding already. And it only lasted a couple hours. And then I went back to the sore throat just vanished and the congestion and fever vanished. And then the next day, something happened that I understood as hopeful. I was so grateful to have these first few experiences that anchored me in hope, because it often didn't feel hopeful, for a lot of the journey. But I had this bracelet. I'm not wearing it today, but it's a bracelet I had made. It's like my jewelry tattoo that I had made when I was sickest. It says "Courage, Dear Heart" on it. And I would wear it every day, wrote without thinking. It's a habit. I take it and I put it on my right wrist. Well, with limbic system retraining, you work very intentionally to signal to your limbic system, we are doing a new thing. We do not need to operate from a place of perpetual survival. There is no imminent threat. We are safe. And we're going to signal that safety in part by showing the limbic system that we are doing a new thing. So I got up the next morning and I was just sort of mindlessly getting ready. And then I looked down and noticed that I had put my bracelet on my opposite wrist. After years of putting it on my right wrist, I went, oh, limby. It's what we talk to our limbic systems with these little nicknames when we start doing limbic system retraining. Oh, you understand we're doing a new thing, right? And not just limby, right? Like it's the survival rate, it's the brain as a whole is starting to internalize this and impacting that small thing. And then, Phil, there were little pockets of quieter symptoms. But we're talking little pockets, like an hour here or an afternoon here. And what I started to see was there would be more and more pockets, and they'd get longer and longer, and then they'd blend into each other. And then it might turn into a day where things are quieter and you feel better. One thing that can happen is the hippocampus heals. It's the part of the limbic system that processes and consolidates long-term memory. You can start to get memories back. Not necessarily bad memories, just memory. So one of my early signs of healing in those first months was I'd be walking down the street and I'd see someone wearing red shoes, and I'd suddenly remember these red suede shoes I had in middle school that I'd forgotten about. Things like that just start generating. And so I later learned, oh, my hippocampus was coming back online. So in retrospect, I can see the signs of healing, but it is very up and down, and there are flares as you live more life. You're exposed to more triggers and the brain can react, and you can have all these flares, and you start detoxing and your immune system starts clearing infection. It just doesn't feel great to heal, is the honest truth. In a lot of ways, those pockets of really feel great, but all the work in between. And then when your body finally starts to perceive that it is safe, it says, okay, let's process the grief now. Thank you. I've been carrying a lot of grief. And so a lot of people are surprised by this wave of grief that blindsides them. For me, it was about 8 months into my healing. So it did not feel like relief, Phil.
Yeah, no, okay. I think it was more. I think people do get a little bit because they visualize themselves being healthy, and so it's not just a switch a light on and you're suddenly healthy. Something I really want to ask you about, and it's something I wonder about a lot when I'm thinking about like DNRS and brain retraining, is that so at the moment I'm in the process of taking a lot of supplements, like binders to get rid of mold, stuff to get my detox pathways going. I'm doing saunas, I'm doing enemas, I'm doing all of these things. And because I'm not doing the limbic system stuff at the moment, that stuff's obviously not having a big impact. Do you think that Does that stuff play a role? Like, were you still doing that stuff alongside your retraining, or do you think that solely through your retraining you could recover?
I think for a lot of people, it does play an important role. My body got so sensitive. I was only eating 5 foods when I finally found DNRS. My body was rejecting everything, including supplements, treatments. The only thing it was tolerating was a benzo. And so for me, the next right thing was to take a break from doctor's appointments and from supplements and my body couldn't tolerate it, right? So my body made the decision for me. There are a lot of people I work with who feel so stressed and triggered by those things that as they're wanting to settle their nervous systems, it's helpful for them to take a break and then incrementally work back toward it, which is what I did. And then there are those who do really well with just continuing to engage the treatments while doing the brain retraining, and the brain retraining really changes the way their body responds to those treatments. I didn't say this, but I think it is important context. When my friend said you need to rehabilitate your amygdala, really what was implied was if the brain is the captain of the ship of your body, and it's barking out unhealthy, haywire messages, your systems are going to respond in unhealthy, haywire ways. So if you can correct the messages the brain is sending to the immune system, digestive system, endocrine system, that's when then you can modulate immune activity and your immune system can come online, your digestive tract can begin to heal, your gut lining can heal. And so it's I think I just want to add to what I had shared about the process of it all. It's not just about retraining the brain. As you begin to retrain the brain, teach the body that you're safe, move the nervous system back to a baseline of regulation where the body can come into homeostasis. Once the body's finally in homeostasis, then it takes time for the body to detox and heal gut lining and clear infection. So that's something important I didn't want to forget to add for those who are listening.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Do you think, so now obviously you've had mold exposure. So mold is something that I've only found out about in the last year and a half. So that's like a whole can of worms that I wasn't aware of that were just there the whole time. Is it now and I know you said you still got a little way to go, but like, is it now in a situation where your nervous system feels it's safe enough that if you were in a moldy situation, obviously it's not ideal, but you can deal with it far better than you previously could, and that it wouldn't then kickstart another episode?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. So actually, I was in a PhD program as I was healing, and the building was moldy and it was not ideal, and I could be in it for a day and also was like, I don't want to stay in this building. So we did end up moving buildings. But yeah, it's okay. The other day I think I need to clean my washing machine. I smelled something moldy, but it's fine, right? It doesn't trigger me psychologically or physiologically. So there's been huge progress there. And I had done some mold detoxing before DNRS, but I haven't done any since I started it in the last 5 years. My body, I've really sensed my body wants to be able to do what she does, right? And just like, give me the space to do it. And so she's been able to detox. And isn't that funny how we start to talk about our bodies as if they're separate entities?
I'm going to start doing that a little bit more about myself. I'm going to do the same. So I love the thought of that. And what's crazy about the mold thing, and for anyone who's dealing with that, is that the first thing you start to hear about, and I started to buy all the books on mold, and there's even a book called Mold Avoidance, I think it is, and just these stories of people going out to the middle of the desert in a caravan and recovering from it because they're escaping it. And for me, that's just like the opposite of what we've been talking about today. And it's really making the nervous system, because I also I left my flat, which I probably, definitely should have done, but I'm there throwing away a lot of stuff, like cleaning all my clothes in a particular kind of, and I guess do you think all of that is building into the whole thing of you being in that frightened mode?
I think the relationship that you have to the approach is the most important thing.
Mm.
So there are a couple of ways that we could relate to that process, maybe of going out and camping. One is where you're trying to outrun the grizzly bear. And I think that's what you're describing, right?
Yeah.
And this is the Chicken Little approach. And right, Chicken Little she is the sympathetic state of fight or flight, right? So we got to outrun the grizzly bear. And that does validate the limbic system's sense that there is a grizzly bear, right? Which is the opposite of what we want to do. We want to help the limbic system understand there is no grizzly bear. You're okay. You can come out of a survival state, whether that's fight or flight or freeze or dorsal vagal shutdown. You can come out of that into a place of regulation and homeostasis. But there's, I think, another way of approaching any method or tool, which is where we say, listen, limbic system, there's no grizzly bear. But we heal by staying in the nervous system's window of tolerance and incrementally expanding the window of tolerance, right? Are you familiar with that term, window of tolerance? Have you heard that before?
I'm not.
Okay.
I makes sense to me in the way you're saying it. Yeah.
It's a really helpful way of thinking about the nervous system, that the window of tolerance is the place that your nervous system is resourced to help you navigate stressors, process stimuli. And when we're pushed to the far edge of the window or outside of the window, that's where the nervous system goes, I don't have the resources to process this anger. I don't have the resources to deal with this mold. There's too much mold, right? Outside of the window is where the nervous system gets overwhelmed. So if we are constantly overwhelming the nervous system, we're keeping it in a survival state. So if we want to move it out of a survival state, we actually need to stay in the window of tolerance. And so if you have a body that is very, very sensitive to mold, you want to be wise and discerning in helping the body stay in the window, and then using your resources like a limbic system retraining program to incrementally grow that window. And so it could be that staying in your window in the beginning does look like enjoying a little vacation in the desert, but not from a place of trying to outrun the grizzly bear, but from a place of self-compassion and wisdom. I think those are the helpful sort of the orientation or the interior posture that we take. I am doing this because I matter, because I'm working collaboratively with my limbic system and my body. And I have a plan for how I'm going to incrementally get to a point where it makes sense for my body to, be in a house. And it does look different for everyone. I personally think I'd be inclined, if I was in a house that I knew was clean but had a little bit of mold, like every house does, to see, is it in my window to train, to limbic system retrain and stay and gather data. So often when we're trying to outrun the grizzly bear, we're not curiously gathering data. Yeah. And that data is so important in informing our wisdom as we discern next steps.
Yeah. No, that's really, it's almost like you want to give you're giving the body like training wheels before it can like take over, and you're handing the baton over for it to then recover itself. Yeah, that's really interesting, and makes a lot of sense. It makes me feel a lot better about kind of what I'm doing at the moment. So just I guess finishing off the story part of it, you were made a lot of, I think you said you were 8 months in, you've made a lot of progression. Could you tell us the next part and the final?
Yes. So I always recommend that people do limbic system retraining programs for at least a year in their fullness. What the research shows, it's a minimum of 6 months of focused, consistent training to even begin to create long-lasting neural pathways. But there's so much more meat on the bone if we keep at it. So 8 months, I started to go, oh, that's where, Phil, what you described, maybe crying those tears of relief. I started to feel that. Like, I remember going cross-country skiing with my mom, and I actually can get a little teary-eyed now thinking about it, and how incredible that was for so many reasons, not just the activity, but the sliding movement in neurologically, my brain was okay with it. And so that was encouraging. There were lots of encouraging things that did start accumulating, and there were still hard flares that were disorienting. And one of the things that can happen is it can feel very scary to hope. So you can experience some incredible healing and feel hopeful, but there's this little protective part that says, well, wait a minute. In the past, when you've hoped, your hopes have been dashed. So maybe better not to go there, because the pain of dashed hopes is too much, right? And so it is a process of the body coming to understand that hope can be safe. And so it's an incremental process of growing hope. And at about the year and a half, so I trained really rigorously without missing a day really for the first year. And then my training began to look a little bit different. I still utilize pillars of DNRS in my life daily, and I will for the rest of my life, because I am never going to graduate from having a nervous system. And I'm always going to live in a world that's broken and full of traumatic triggers and grief and loss. And so my nervous system needs this. So there have been seasons that I have leaned in again. I've had actually a lot of trauma the last 4 years. It's been a very, very hard 4 years on my nervous system. And so it's incredible the healing that I have seen. So there have been seasons where I've leaned back into the program in its fullness. But one of the things that at the year and a half mark I started doing was processing my grief more intentionally. I had more neurological capacity to do that. We don't think about how important the role of the body is in even processing emotion. So I also started doing EMDR and engaging in some gentle treatments. Some total body modification has been especially helpful. My body does best with sort of recalibrating as opposed to pumping it full of supplements. So it's been the approach that I've taken. And then, have you heard of top-down processing and bottom-up processing?
Yeah, I'm reading a book at the moment called I think it's called Doing the Work, and it was talking about that. Yeah.
So that top-down processing is essentially the idea that our cognitive capacity, our capacity for reason and imagination, can totally impact what's going on in our bodies, right? Like it can impact the immune system, the endocrine system, the cardiovascular system. And limbic system retraining programs really rely on a very structured, rigorous approach to top-down processing. What's happening in your brain is affecting the rest of your body. Bottom-up processing is the idea that what we do with our bodies shapes the brain. It changes what's happening in the brain, our neural firing patterns, our thoughts, our emotions. And the vagus nerve, which is that, that wandering nerve that innervates our heart and organs, 80% of its fibers are afferent, which means 80% of its fibers take data or information from the body and move it up to the brain. So it's looking at what's the tension in the body? What's the oxygen in the blood? And it takes that data, and if the body is relaxed and the blood has plenty of oxygen, then the vagus nerve signals to the brain, hey, this is what's happening. The brain goes, oh, good, we're safe. But if the body is tense and constricted and not getting much oxygen because breathing patterns aren't great because you're in that fight or flight state, then those afferent nerves from the vagus, or those afferent fibers from the vagus nerve, signal to the body we're not safe. So you can actually signal safety to your brain by the way you move your body. And so a big piece of my healing journey has been not only the top-down processing with limbic system retraining programs, but gentle somatic practice that uses the nervous system's language of sensation to signal safety to my survival brain. And so I teach a monthly virtual class called Release, Rewire, and Restore. And this really focuses on that bottom-up approach, that gentle somatic practice that can speak the nervous system's language to help it understand that it's safe so the body can release stored trauma and move back to that regulated baseline. So it's been a progressive process for me of coming at this from a more and more holistic approach, recognizing that the way that I grieve and tend to my soul is going to impact my body, and the way I tend to my body is going to impact my soul.
That's it. So did you? I heard that before, somatic move. I've been hearing that a lot in the last, I don't know, even just the last couple of months. What is that something? Sorry, as you can tell, I haven't really looked at much. Is it? What would you, if I was looking that up as something I could do myself? Is it called somatic movement? Is that what it is, or what is it?
Well, yeah, there are a lot of different approaches, methodologies. So you might look at Peter Levine.
Okay.
He is the creator of something that's called somatic experiencing, which is a process you engage with a practitioner who will guide you through being able to release trauma stored at a bodily level. So I think he is probably a helpful starting point. I'm trying to think who else. Kathy Kane, for people who want to investigate. She has a program.
Is that K-N-A-A?
I believe it is. I believe it is K
Sure,
and
fine.
K. Both. I believe both are Ks.
Okay,
Kathy
cool.
and Kane, but I'm not positive
Cool
about that.
I think that's great to be getting on with. So I guess just a few more questions from me. Just looking back on like your toughest time now, like your lowest, and there's going to be people now who are at that same period of time listening to this, and they're trying to draw strength from your story and you know, various stories on this podcast. What would be your advice to someone in that state at the moment? Not necessarily practically what to do, although if you want to, but more just like, you know, advice for them to keep going and keep trying.
You know, there can be such a focus as we heal on the tools, whether it's a somatic tool or a cognitive tool, like a guided visualization or a resource like a supplement. And really, tools are just tools. What makes a tool powerful is how we use it. If we're using a tool within the context of a loving relationship with ourselves, friendship with our body, and collaboration, that's what changes everything. That's what creates felt safety, right? Our nervous system is so incredibly relational because our souls are relational. And so as we can come into loving relationship with ourselves and our bodies, that alone is going to create so much felt safety. But then that's going to transform the way your body reacts to the different resources that you use. So my first encouragement would be to be gentle with you, to be compassionate, to engage the process of a paradigm shift, which takes time. So be gracious with yourself on this process where you start to understand your body is a friend and it is trying to protect you when it's in a survival state and when things go wonky. It can feel like an enemy, it can feel like a prison, and those are very valid experiences. But your body is this vessel, it's doing the best that it can, and it's going to open you to so much grace. So one of the things that can foster that gentleness is to start noticing the ways your body opens you to grace, right? So for me, I started noticing, wow, look how my fingers can peel this orange and how my nose opens me to that pop of zest that's so satisfying. And now I can feel the juice as I eat the wedge and I can taste it and I can taste tangy and sweet. And I have a body that allows me to feel a hug and like the warmth of sunshine. And I have a brain that's part of my body that opens me to so much imaginative capacities. I can write and I can read good stories. And I think that is going to be a really powerful practice in beginning to shift the way you relate to your body. Understanding how the nervous system works, I think, will help you also understand your nervous system is trying to protect you. It is fiercely committed to you. And sometimes it just can look a little wonky the way that it commits to you. And I think that would be, if I could expound on that, sort of a last piece here. Investigate the role of the nervous system in healing chronic systemic illness, in healing chronic mental illness. Consider doing some sort of brain retraining program, whether it's a top-down or bottom-up, or I highly recommend both. And let yourself move at a pace that is gentle. Let yourself stay in your window of tolerance, incrementally growing it. And, you know, actually, if I did add, I think what has been the most important thing, you know, I just talked about how our relationship with ourselves, it's like the container within which we use these tools. But I think there's even a bigger container. We learn how to love ourselves when we understand how we're loved by God. And that is the context, right? Goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life because I'm loved, even when I have nothing to offer and all I'm doing is lying in bed and breathing and blinking. And so much of learning to love myself has been imitating God's love toward me. And that has been the game changer. So those are the things, I think those are the starting point.
Amazing. And just my final question, looking back on, what you've been through and how your life is today, could you, how is your life different today, in the positive ways, than it, let's say, if you carried on down that high achiever route that you were going down and carried on down that route? How is your life different today, and how can you be grateful for, the various ways that you can be grateful for how your life is today?
When I look back at the achiever route, I can see how my relationship with my nervous system, my body, became quite antagonistic at that point. Though I wasn't feeling feelings of antagonism, I was not working collaboratively with my nervous system, right? I tried to force and suppress and stuff, and instead of listening to the signals my body gave me for years, instead of trying to stay in my window. So how my life looks different now is I am gentler with me. I'm more compassionate. I'm collaborative with my body. I love my body. It's amazing how it took getting sick for me to really learn to love my body in a way that not even flying over hurdles at top speed helps me love my body. And that is thrilling. That can really make you love your body. So I think, I've had to face a lot of shame. So there is, I think, and it will be a lifelong journey, I think, of tending to shame and healing shame, but there is more of a grounded sense of God loves me because he loves me, and my people love me because they love me, not because of anything that I have to offer. They don't love me for my metaphorical bank account, right? Like the things that I can give them. They love me for me. And there's a real grounding grace in that. And, the last thing that I'll say here, there's a lot, Phil. There's so much redemption and beauty that God is always transfiguring the darkness into light. And sometimes I picture it's like he's spinning the darkness into gold. Do you remember that fairy tale with Rumpelstiltskin, where there was the gal that had the pile of hay? And I don't remember, it's been a long time since I've read this. I'm going to botch it. Something bad was going to happen to her unless she spun the hay into gold. And so Rumpelstiltskin came and did that for her. And sometimes I do picture it's like God takes the darkness and he turns it into gold. And then he says, now give it away. And that's what I get to do. I think anybody who's been sick starts to see you become a wounded healer, right? There's so much credentialing that happens. There's so much voice that you can have when you live through the things you and I have lived through. And then there's so much that you can give to other people. And so for me now as a coach, where I get to help people navigate the process of healing trauma and grief and rewiring the brain and helping people feel less alone and feeling hope. And I was a teacher before. I was teaching college English, and I thought that was what I was going to do for the rest of my life, teaching at the university level. And here I am doing this. It surprised me. There are good plot twists, and this is a plot twist that brings me so much joy, that I get to help other people find not just relief at a bodily level, but healing for the soul.
Yeah, I love that we could do another episode on what you're grateful for. I can tell. If people wanted to connect with you, reach out to you, like, what's the best way of them doing that?
Well, Instagram is a good place to connect. I post daily healing resources on Instagram, and that's Sarah with an H, Sarah Jackson Panther, like the cat. And my website is the same. If you want to learn more about the somatic practice that I do in my healing movement class, it's really, really gentle. It's compatible with brain retraining programs. You can learn more there, learn more about my story there. And then I have a YouTube channel that also has some videos that give more context to my story.
Awesome. And thank you so much for coming on and telling your story. I know so much. I've definitely got a lot from it. And it's made me just know even more that the brain retraining stuff is there. I think people will probably get fed up of me continuing saying I need to do it. So it's something that I at least I'm on this platform, so I can be held accountable to it. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Phil. I'm excited for you as you embark on this journey of brain retraining.
Oh, oh,